What's up guys, my name is Josh, and today we're going to be doing a full in-depth review of the Akg M220. Before we get into this, I do want to disclose that Massdrop did send me this item to a review. They did give it to me for free, but they haven't paid, asked, or otherwise tried to influence me to say anything good or bad about this headphone, so all thoughts are my own. This is a headphone that hits far and above the cost that it comes in at. I think these are about $50 on Massdrop, which I will link below, and I will also put a link in Amazon so you can purchase it if for some reason it's not available on Drop, and I think on Amazon it's about $60. And before I break down the sound and everything, I do want to address a couple of different headphones. One is going to be the Samson, I think it's the SR80, and the second one is going to be the Superlux 668B. And the reason why I'm talking about those is because they look very, very familiar to this headphone, and I've heard both and I've owned the 668Bs for I think almost 2 years now, and I can absolutely confirm that they do not sound anything alike. They kind of have the same kind of general sound signature when it comes to kind of having an emphasis in the mid-range and the treble, and not a whole lot in the sub-bass department, but when it comes to the actual reproduction of quality and actually the mid-range, these differ widely from those headphones, and in my opinion, they are worth the extra cost. You do actually get noticeably better build quality despite them looking very, very similar. As someone who's recommended the 668Bs in the past, this is actually going to take over that recommendation because I actually think it's genuinely worth the couple extra dollars. And you get better pads, you don't have to buy extra pads like you would have to do with the 668B. That being said, I want to talk about the sound in general of this headphone. In one word, I would describe it as being clean. The vocals are clean. The treble is clean, the bass is clean, although a tiny bit lacking. And really, you get a very solid picture of the entirety of sound. And if you're gonna look at this headphone, that's really what you gotta be into. You gotta be into a wide, very complete, very clean sound, crisp highs and solid vocals and great room acoustics. The treble comes across to me as being very, very crisp without being overly bright or overly dramatic, and without much sibilance actually. And by much sibilance, I really don't perceive much sibilance in the treble regions at all. There was a little bit of sibilance when you get into the upper limits of female vocals, like around like 1500 to 2000 hertz. Occasionally they seem a little bit bright, and there's a little bit of a peak in that area from what I can hear, although I can't really find a solid graph for these online, so consider that it's just based off of what I'm hearing. Cymbals, hi-hats, bells, anything with like a really or piano as well actually, anything with a really extended kind of roll off into the higher frequencies is just represented immaculately, especially for the money. I think high notes are where a lot of cheaper end headphones seem to really fall apart on, and that's what this headphone, in my opinion, does exceedingly well. And it has very forward and aggressive treble without being too bright. It's like it's just to that level of being satisfying and getting this great level of reproduction without getting this overly sharpness or over brightness to it, or without being too much. And that's representation that I can really get behind. And what's funny is that the K712s, which come in at like what, 8 times the cost, 6 times the cost, somewhere around there, they're quite a bit more expensive. I actually feel like these handle the high end better than those headphones did. So the mid-range, normally I would talk about like the reproduction of vocals, and I will talk a little bit about that because I'm a vocal-based guy. But I actually want to talk about the delivery of the mid-range and break down some of the frequency areas that I felt were kind of interesting. And I'm sorry to talk about frequencies. I know not everybody's interested, so bear with me here. When you get into the mid-range, between like 300 to 500 hertz, vocals have a very surrounding delivery, and actually sounds in general in that frequency range have a very kind of wide delivery to them. And then when you get above 500 hertz, anywhere between like 500 to 1000, you see this very quick transition between a wide sound to a very, very narrow sound. So certain vocals can literally go from being surrounding within the same vocalist, just singing different frequencies or different notes, are going to go from surrounding to very, very finite. Almost every headphone does this. That's why, you know, when you're talking about imaging, generally you're going to listen to kind of the treble response, or, you know, a hi-hat that's a very specific finite position, you know, here, 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 or wherever it happens to be. And pretty much every headphone that I've ever tried has this slow transition into being more finite and having a more accurate center sound. when you get higher in the frequencies. But the bit that interests me on this particular headphone is that development is so quick. So you can literally have male vocals that hit, you know, between like 300 to 500, like I said, and they sound like very broad, very good. Tonally, the vocals are excellent. But it's very surrounding in the delivery. And then you have somebody like Morgan James, who when she's really going at it with her voice, it's very finite. And that development can happen even within a song. You know, a common artist like Sam Smith, who has a great vocal range in terms of frequencies, in the same song, you can have this broad sound and then a very finite sound. And that development was so quick and so abrupt. And I actually really liked it. Now, one category that I feel like is going to be a little bit lacking for people is going to be the sub bass. And when you get into that sub bass category, there's not really a whole lot of not just visceralness, but there's not even a whole lot of detail when you get under like 80 hertz. 70 to 80 hertz is where it starts to roll off quite significantly. And then you kind of have this slight rise between 80 to 120-ish, and then it seems to kind of settle down a little bit going into that mid-range that I talked about in a second. So this isn't going to give you the most rumbling bass. You don't have that super low frequency, but the room does sound very natural. And when I'm talking about room, I'm talking about like the imaging and the soundstage and the acoustics of the room, the reflections, the echoes, the reverberation, and all those things really make a headphone sound a particular way beyond just what frequencies they're playing. So speaking of that, the imaging is incredibly tight when you get higher up in the frequencies. You know, cymbals, drums, you have this very finite imaging, and it's very in front of you. That's something that this headphone does very well. And the soundstage, it starts pretty wide. Like 600s kind of start here, you know, like, and then these kind of start out here, and then they go far beyond and far out in terms of the soundstage of it. They're not the widest headphone ever. I think that the K7XXs and the K712s are both wider. But these do go fairly wide, and they give you a very in-the-room feeling, and they make these incredible for gaming. Actually, I have the little mod mic on here right now because I've been gaming with these lately and really liking it. So if this does sound like the signature that you're interested in, does sound like something that you're into, what can you expect in terms of the power requirements and the build quality of it? So this headphone is somewhat misleading, and I list this as headphones that are misleading because a lot of people think that impedance is like the defining factor for how hard a headphone is to drive. And that's not totally incorrect, but it is, again, misleading. This headphone has an impedance of 55 ohms, which is fairly efficient, but it has a sensitivity level of 91 decibels. To be easy to drive, you want your impedance to be low and your sensitivity to be very high. And you know, anything over 100 is generally really easy to drive. Anything below 100 is a little bit harder and does require an amplifier. This headphone absolutely requires an amplifier just in terms of the volume output that it's capable of doing. 600s are notorious for being a headphone that kind of sets the bar for a headphone that benefits from an amplifier. And on the 1 amp here, I'm showing you how far I have to turn it up to be loud on a HC6XX. And then this scene is going to be how far I have to turn it up to be loud on the M220s here. And they need lots of power, and out of the single-ended output that I was using there, that puts out about 3.3 watts, so that gives you kind of your baseline. Now regarding the build, the cups themselves are actually pretty solid plastic, but some of the hinge mechanisms for the ears do feel a little bit cheap and not super robust, but you're not really paying for it to be the most, you know, well-built headphone in the world. The headband is very comfortable and works off a suspension system. This suspension system I haven't heard too many people complain about, despite not feeling like the most solid thing in the world. But I haven't heard anybody complain, and I have never had any issues personally, so I can't really knock it there. Overall, it's a comfortable design. The ear pads do get a little bit hot for me, even in kind of a cold room. Maybe not hot necessarily, but sweaty, so in the summer they would definitely get hot. And that's just because the leather that they use is just not breathable. So in conclusion, the build is about what you would expect for $50 or $60, and they do require a lot of power, but if you can power them, they are honestly a really good purchase and 100% worth the money. And I would buy them myself. Luckily, I don't have to because they sent me them. Regarding the sound, I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10. It's not my most preferred sound signature, but for gaming and movies and things like that, I definitely appreciate it. And I think that it does lack in certain areas, but overall, for the cost, I mean, it's equivalent to $150, $200 headphones, and I genuinely mean that, but it's like 50 or 60 bucks. So for sound quality, it's a 10 out of 10 for me. As an overall package, because of the just okay build quality, it's gonna be like a 9 out of 10. It also comes in a few colors too, so that might be kind of interesting. All right, guys, I think that's gonna wrap it up. Thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video.